Hello everyone, hopefully you can hear me correctly. Welcome to this new codeLive in which we are going to talk about flows, exactly flows for developers because this is the developer channel, so we are going to try to take a look at them from a developer perspective. And I'm going to start by explaining to you why we are here today and why I have Aaron and Kenny here in the stream with me. So, some weeks ago, person called Michael Philbrick, who is an account executive with 30 years experience in the world of development and 7 years experience on Salesforce implementations, wrote to me because he had been listening to a podcast in which I talked about how to migrate from Visual Force to Lightning Web Components. And in that podcast, I explained that if you have some Visual Force pages that you want to migrate to, let's say, Lightning, okay, you may take a look first at the declarative options that you have, because the declarative options of the platform. Um, okay, give me a second because I'm receiving some background noise, so I think it comes from Aaron. I'm going to mute you for a second and then I will unmute you. Okay, thank you. Okay, sorry for that. So I was saying that I did a podcast on how to migrate from Visual Force to Lightning, and I talk about the Lightning Web Components options, but we also talked about how the declarative options of the platform, the low code options, have improved quite a lot in the last years. And the most important and famous tool, declarative tool that we have for declarative development is, of course, Flow. So Michael asked me why we are not talking more about this topic on the developer channel, and he's perfectly right. Also, he told me that he thinks that to build a flow that is robust and that it's performant, having a developer mindset helps a lot, and that he wanted to like he wanted us to share more information about this. So what I told him was, hey Michael, why don't you join our stream? Why don't you show to us some of those solutions that you've implemented with customers? Okay, so Michael suggested that instead of him showing the solutions that some customers have implemented, we could invite a customer who had been really successful by implemented solutions using Flow in combination with code. And that is why we have here today Michael and Aaron. So first of all, I'm going to share the forward-looking statement slide. You know this slide, it just means that Salesforce is a publicly traded company, and it means that you should make purchasing decisions based on the functionality that is generally available and not on the pilot or beta features. But today we are going to talk about implementations that are in production, that are working, although I will explain a little bit about the roadmap later on at the end of the session. So, Kenny, Aaron, do you want to introduce yourselves?
Absolutely, yeah. Alba, appreciate that. So, hey everyone, my name is Kenny, based in Toronto. Background is started my career actually in sales, but then got into the sales ops side and started to dabble a little bit in code, but primarily on the declarative side of the system, and work a lot with developers, and have had the opportunity more recently, and very timely for this topic, to start to get into conversations about how we can really leverage code within the Flow framework, and really start to come up with great solutions that not only benefit the client, but make the work a bit more fun, because you're writing code that's unique and different and exciting, and aligns well with adding the most value to the organization. So anyways, those types of projects have been great. Today, I oversee Kicksaw, so we're Salesforce partners. So we're working in and around Salesforce every single day across many different tools. And so getting the ability to work with some of the declarative capabilities within Salesforce, and then LWCs, ARAs, etc., across Sales Cloud, Service Cloud, Experience Cloud instances. It's a lot of fun and exciting stuff around the ecosystem. I'll pass it over to Aaron to quickly introduce himself.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Aaron. I'm a delivery manager at Kicksaw. I oversee a team of admins on demand. Before that, I spent a lot of my time doing work for our customers. I primarily spend my time in Flow, but the code you'll see today, I wrote, and then we have some other stuff I'll allude to that our excellent engineering team gave to me because they're better at it than I am. I've been in the Salesforce ecosystem since about 2019 and was in nonprofit management for like 15 years before that.
Thank you. Thank you both for joining today. And thank you because today we're going to see how flow can be an option. Of course, we all love code. I love code, but flow can be an option when you need to speed up the process, when your company is under certain circumstances. For instance, when you don't have developers available, right? And we're going to see how you can like leverage the great capabilities that flow has today, especially after all those new improvements that we have released in the last releases. And you can improve the leverage those capabilities to like build maybe simpler functionality fast, while you can like spend your time coding something that is more fun, more complex, right? So I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to let Kenny and Aaron talk us about some of the solutions that they have implemented successfully with Flow and Lightning Web Components and Apex.
Perfect. Thanks, Alba. And I think you're right there. I think I don't think this is a conversation of Flow versus Apex. I think this is the conversation of how do we create the best outcome that produces the best solution for end users, for customers, depending on which side of the fence that you're on, either in consulting or in-house. And there's the right balance there. So they're not mutually exclusive. And that's what's going to be exciting about today, which is we're going to show how we can really pair development with flows. And so we have a few different examples that we'll talk through today. The first is going to be a really nice screen flow that talks through how we can leverage LWC and ARA components to extend some of the capabilities of what we're capable of doing in a screen flow, something that we have worked on internally, something that we've worked with clients on. So some really exciting stuff on that end. We'll then jump into some invocable Apex. So flows get us a significant portion of the way there, but there are still limitations to flow. And we still have to write some Apex and calling that Apex from the flow and being able to work with them in unison and showing that example of how we can take action there. And then we'll also talk through some of the new flow features that kind of help reduce the need for Apex in flow. So aspects of flow that allow us to take some capabilities that previously required writing code and now no longer require code, and getting us to expand the capabilities of what we can do declaratively in Salesforce. Because to Alba's point, we don't want to write code in environments where we don't have developers accessible, or where Salesforce is having their releases and consistently improving on aspects of flow that we want to work directly within flow and then leverage code at a later point in time. So I'll hand it over to Aaron to walk through those three examples, starting with the screen flows.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm really proud of the screen flow that we're going to show you. It's a thing that we didn't do for a customer. We actually did it for Kicksaw. It's a CSAT survey. A little context around it. The primary person who owns it, kind of moving forward, I assist with the build, is not a developer and doesn't have developer resources. So one of our requirements was to give our ops team a tool that they could keep updated without frequent request to engineering. So I'm going to show you what it looks like first, and then we'll kind of dig into the components that make it up. So basically, we create a CSAT survey record with a storage spot for a score and a comments. We can email this link out to customers, and they land on this page. Is, by the way, in my demo org. It's not as fancy as what marketing required me to do for our actual page. And then here we have a Lightning component, and we used a Lightning component here because the out-of-the-box flow has a slider thing, but it requires there to be a default value, and we didn't want a default value, so we needed to add a little bit of code to happy it up. This is actually a flexible component, you can set the range. So you can use the same component for NPS, for example, if you wanted to have it start at 0 and go up to 10. But we can just take some feedback here. And then we have basically just a small LWC that gives us the look and feel that we want. It updates the record here, and we have a solution that's pretty maintainable by our internal team. Now, there's a lot in this solution, so I can first show the LWC. We'll pull it up real quick.
Fantastic.
So like you can see we just use the grid system. It's an out of the box component, so we didn't have to do too much work in LWC to get it to work. And it's, simple JavaScript to set the starting values if there are some. We can make it required or not required in Flow. So if you take a look at the screen flow where this happens, in the component, it's configurable. So I can actually show a slider version. You can set the max number, the minus number, and these are very nice to have tools like as you're building LWCs for yourself or for folks who can do declarative development but not code. Like having the ability to configure these things is very slick, and it kind of got us going pretty good on our product. Now this kind of transitions us
Aaron,
nicely into, go ahead.
let me stop you for a second. So basically what you're doing there, you have a component that you have created using the line the size system grid, right? And then in that component you have some properties, and those properties are the ones that match with what we saw in the screen, right? What the admin can
Correct.
configure. Okay.
Mm-hmm. So like, for example, if I were to change this left label to, very dissatisfied, when I go to launch the flow again, it says very dissatisfied instead of very unhappy. So you can kind of use it to set your language. You can also set the maximum number. So like if we set the maximum number to 0 and here, and we'll just, I think I have to give it, an encrypted ID in order to debug it. So we'll do it live.
Okay.
I don't have that
You
ready.
know what happens with live demos, right?
Yeah, always. So what happens is we don't have our CSS correct on the left label, but this is fine. Yeah, I'll fix it. So, but yeah, you can change it. It's flexible. We can get that going there. Alba, I don't know why you had to jinx me by calling out that I would have live demo problems.
That's
All
always
right.
what
So
happens.
This
What's
yeah,
great
happens.
about this What's great about this too is firstly just how you can get extremely custom with how the look and feel of it is, obviously, but still make it very usable and editable by an admin who isn't a dev. So that's great. And then I can't think of an organization in the world that doesn't want to leverage some survey in some capacity, whether it's like internal employee surveys, whether it's CSAT surveys, whether it's NPS. Everyone uses surveys in some capacity. And so this is a really nice lightweight solution that allows companies to get that out there.
yeah. And I think this transitions really nicely into leveraging Invocable Apex to do some things that Flow can't handle, because this solution includes some of that. So you might notice when we go to the survey link that we have this encrypted string instead of a record ID. This is an unauthenticated Salesforce community. So we want to make sure that it's not like spoofable or spammable. So having an encrypted ID makes it very difficult for us to get spam requests at this deal, and makes it more secure, especially if you deploy it in like HLS settings. It's encrypting the ID of the CSAT record. So it's not really even tied to a person at this point, except through the lookup. So pretty secure. And we need to create this encrypted ID. So in order to do that, we actually have a flow that calls a little bit of Apex to encrypt the record ID. I want to kind of pause for a second here and say, like, if I'm creating Invocable Apex for the purposes of having someone who's writing a whole system like this in Flow, where there's going to be like multiple flows involved, some Apex involved, I think it's important to keep the DML on the Flow side and let the config, because the idea is long term the configurator, the person who's doing Flow, is going to be the one maintaining this and not the person who's writing the Apex. So leaving them in charge of the DML statements is useful. if you're writing it for yourself and you're always going to be in charge of it, I think that's kind of a different story. So it really kind of depends on the use case, but that's kind of an interesting call out here. So
Yeah,
this
and
just
Aaron,
go ahead.
you had to go to Apex in this case to leverage the encryption capabilities that Apex has, and this is going to happen in certain use cases. For instance, when you want to write batch Apex, for instance, when you need to use the capabilities of batch Apex, or when you want to write like more performant code, like using structures typically in Apex, such as maps and such as other capabilities that exist in Apex and that don't really exist in Flow, right? But there is like a big portion of the business logic that you can implement in your Flow, and then there is another portion which is like the most complex logic that you implement in Apex and in Lightning Web Components, and that way you can like create completely custom solutions, right? Combining the two technologies and also getting the speed of building with Flow.
Yeah, absolutely. And like occasions where you need to build a map data structure is a great example of times when you just have to go. There's some new flow features that I'll show later in the call that kind of actually take some of those use cases off. It's not quite as powerful as the map data structure, but there's some new operators in flow, for flow collections that sometimes get you out of the need for Apex. We'll cover those a little later. But you're exactly right. I want to kind of cover the invocable Apex just a little bit because when I work with developers who haven't written invocable Apex or don't use Flow, sometimes they do some things that make it difficult for me to use the Apex. So one, it's I really like it when the developers write me a data class that passes the values. Uh, these invocable methods are basically always bulkified. So uh, the methods accept a list of these data types. So even though in most of my use cases it's one record save at a time, it's actually giving a list of all these parameters. And if you use like standard data types, like you can have an invocable Apex method that accepts a list of strings and returns a list of strings, but then you basically can only pass it one thing and you can only get back one thing from it. So even in the case where all I want back is one string, it's super nice if I go ahead and build it such that if I need to expand it later, I can return more things. And then of course up in here, you're making sure to bulkify it so you're not my version 1 of this basically just had me using the key at index 0 for all of these, and then I learned how to code a little bit better. So please don't use the values at index 0 for your flow writers. All right, so let's dig back into the solution. So yeah, this just is a record triggered flow. There's some fun settings here, but basically I can set this up to only fire when the record with either only when the record is updated to meet the conditions or every time. Here it's every time because basically anytime the encrypted ID is blank, I want this to fire and fill out the encrypted ID so that I always have that. And then we'll go back here and you can see the survey link is just a formula field that hits that page in my unauthenticated community and appends that encrypted ID. Um, Okay. And then what's required for this? So there's actually a little more Apex in this solution. We need an AES key. I made an interesting design decision. A lot of the internet suggested I should store my AES key in a custom setting, but because I'm usually installing this in orgs that aren't not in the managed package context, that's actually visible to every system admin in the system. So instead, what I did is I stored it in a custom object on encrypted fields, so only users with view encrypted data can see the thing. And I think that's if you would package this up, you would use a custom setting, and you wouldn't have to go through this step. But we do need admins when they install the unmanaged package that I have to create an AES key. So I've basically generated for them a screen flow that makes sure the keys stay unique. We need the Apex again to create the key. So I can show that. So this basically just this generates a random string for the initialization vector. It takes a string for the name, and then we have basically a key that we can use that's used by the other Invocable Apex. In the first couple of versions of this, I just copied this code from my test class and popped it into the anonymous Apex, but I had started having other people at Kicksaw use this pattern, so I needed to make a tool so that it was more accessible. So we're back to Invocable Apex, and now folks can create their own keys. All right.
This is a nice use case. Thank you very much for sharing that. I want to pause for a second, Aaron, because I want to say hello to some people who are writing comments into the chat. Okay, we have Larry Goodbar. Hello, Larry. We have Sridhari. We have Sarah. I know Sarah personally. Thank you so much for joining, Sarah. And we have the Frey, who has some questions about code coverage. I think that we're going to talk about testing later on, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we can try to touch on that question later. And then there is another question about best practices when deploying flows using CI/CD. So we'll try to go to your questions, to arrive to your questions. But also, I can tell you that this is the automation month. And on top of the codeLive that we have today, we have an amazing Ask Me Anything session with Flow product managers on the 29th. I'm going to share a slide later with all the information. And there's, if some questions remain if we don't have time to respond all the questions, or we just don't have the knowledge, you can go to that Ask Me Anything session and ask the product managers who are going to be there. And for sure, I have a good response to your question as well. Okay, sorry to interrupt you. Aaron, you can continue.
Yeah, I think we can address those questions right now. I think they're kind of pertinent before we lead into the other items. So there's, when you talk about, if you're doing continuous integration or in deployment with flows, you can deploy flows as active if they are covered by test classes. And there's kind of two ways to go about this. For record triggered flows, you can actually write a test in flow, and there's some fancy automation to let you do that. And then for other types of flows, you can actually call the flow from a test class and get coverage that way. And then there's an object in Salesforce for flow coverage, and if you request that like, you can query that object and check your coverage in your org for all your active, or for flow coverage, you want all of your active flows or all of your most recent versions of the inactive flows to be covered. So there's definitely tooling and good information to get that done. You'll notice that I use a lot, or if you look at my tabs, you'll notice that I use a lot of subflows. I use actually subflows even when I'm doing record triggered flows, and I do that for a couple of different reasons. One, I can call this subflow from a test class. I can't call a record triggered flow from a test class. So it makes it easy if I want to write like a unit test on my subflow, I just call the flow there. Also, record triggered flows, if you debug one, so there's awesome debugging tools in Flow. But you see, like, I can't uncheck run flow and rollback mode when I'm doing a record triggered flow. And occasionally, like, I really want to run the flow because there's a record that got missed or something like that. So if I'm in a subflow, I can debug this flow. I can feed it some input I can feed this an opportunity. I can not check run flow and rollback mode, and I can just both check that my code is doing what I want and update that record live. That's especially valuable in sandboxes, and for the brave in production, don't do it. So subflow, like using so a lot of times I'll write a subflow and then call it from a record triggered flow, and yeah.
And dividing your flows into subflows is a best practice, right? We don't want like a Frankenstein flow. We want like the same modularization that you can obtain with code applied to your flow designs. That's why I think that Michael Philbrick told me, but a developer can like build flows much better than a person who doesn't have development experience, because we have already that modularization and reusability mindset with us, right?
Yeah, and I have some fun examples of reusable flows coming up.
And I think this goes without saying, but I'll just hit this point home because I see it over and over again, which is I don't think a lot of companies view flows in the same light as they view writing code with respect to test classes and managing the process and best practices in terms of subflows and whatnot. And the reality is you start to add on more clouds, as you start to accumulate more complexities and users and sophistication and integrations, it becomes much harder to untangle it, even if it's all declarative. So leveraging the best practices, CI/CD pipeline, all that type of stuff, even in the context of declarative work with flows, I think is still something that will go a long way and set up the right foundation. So it's obvious, but many companies don't do it. So it should be mentioned.
Yeah. If I had $1 for every time I looked at a flow that was in a customer org when I first saw it that didn't null check their gets, like I would have many dollars. You would have $0 if you checked mine. You might have one. I don't know. I might have missed one. All right, so I want to just before we jump into some of the subflows and some of the kind of cool new advanced features for non-screen flows, I want to show some features for screen flows. And basically, I'm going to highlight things that weren't possible the last time I was doing a lot of screen flows and are pretty jazzy and I'm pretty excited about. So we're just going to debug this guy. A little call out to the debug in Flow. It's much nicer than the developer experience of the debug logs. We always have nice stuff on here. So this is the lookup thing. And actually, I wanted to show this screen first. So relatively new is the ability to do a section in Flow. And then you have basically a simple implementation of the SLDS grid. So we can update these and kind of get a different look and feel, center things to the right and left. I think the kind of legacy thought on flows is if you need it to be pixel perfect or look pretty, it's not the right tool. And it's ever more increasingly becoming a tool where you can do some pretty good looking stuff, including throwing some side margins on here in this pretty simple use case. So this is the lookup thing. It actually has the ability to just let you select an account, be required or not required, or in this case, you can do kind of a multiple account lookup. And then it stores your selections. If you look over to the side, in the first example, we are storing the record ID just in a single text variable. And in the second example, we're storing it in a list of IDs. So this is pretty exciting functionality. When this lookup thing first came out, it wasn't nearly this powerful or good. Now, like I think it's usable in a pretty wide variety of contexts. Like you might even, for example, with the new in operator, which I'll show later, you can basically take this list and say, hey, give me all the contacts for these two accounts that were selected, but only return the ones for the selected accounts. And you also can limit, like this one you see I set to max values 3. So you can prevent your user from selecting like 100 accounts or something like that and then getting an unruly amount of contacts. This is the slider I mentioned earlier. This is a pretty slick UI thing that we can use. This is just an out of the box slider. There's no custom code here. It's configurable as well. So I set 0 to 10 for this. It comes in the ability to set different sizes. And then I really like the toggle element, which is way better than checkboxes, which were the previous way that we would kind of store Boolean values in a screen flow. So some nice UI enhancements to show here. There's also ones that I'm less familiar with, but like there are some Slack. There's a pre-built thing for Slack channel selecting, for Slack workspace selecting. So the administrators have a lot of tools at their disposal. If you have Service Cloud folks that are doing scheduling appointments, there's some really nice like out of the box components. I don't have ready to show. I don't have those things configured in this org, but there's taking a look through the out of the box components is much more exciting than it was in the past. So you should definitely give them a look. All right, I want to talk about some of the non UI type of things and look at some ways that we can now do flows much differently than we did in the past. So I mentioned on the previous thing that there's a new in operator for get records. So right now I'm basically saying, hey, give me all opportunities where the account ID is in this list of accounts. And the way this works in practice, so I basically set myself a problem to solve. So this isn't a flow I did for a customer. This is a flow I did for this. So let's say that I had the requirement that I wanted, in this org, I'm using account contact relationships. So I have indirect relationships with accounts, and I want basically a flow that tells me, hey, how many opportunities are associated to this contact based on all of their account contact relationships. So if this contact is indirectly related to 3 accounts, how many opportunities did those accounts have, right? Now, we could definitely solve this problem by having the customer use opportunity contact roles or something like that, but let's say that they don't, and we need to do this. This would have been a case where I would have gone to Apex, because it's really hard in Flow to go up and back down the data model when you're doing rollups effectively. You could do it in Flow without the in operator, but you'd have a loop within a loop, which gets you into LDV, large data volume problems all the time. And I basically don't do it. Like loop in a loop means Apex, right? So if we come back to the subflow that I wrote now, you see there's no loop within a loop. There is one loop, so we get all of the account contact relationships for this, and this flow accepts a contact, right? And here the debugger of Flow really shows off, right? So we can debug it, and then the last contact, like here, the last contact we look at comes up, and we can select them. We can choose to run the flow in rollback mode or not. And when we run it, we can get kind of a readout of everything that happens. So we're grabbing all of the account contact relationships for our most recent contact. We're looping, we're looking through that, we're building a list, and then we're getting the opportunities. And now we can basically just use the value. We can, with that, this is a list of opportunities. We can use the equals count operator to just set this value on the contact. I want to point out this here, like a lot of new Flow writers, or even like even developers who aren't familiar with Flow, will overuse variables that aren't record variables. So I kind of think like the right data type is very important. So for me, if there is a piece of data that corresponds to a field on an object in Salesforce, almost without exception, the correct data type is a record variable of that data type. So here, I'm not setting like opportunity count and then later on adding that to the contact. I'm setting record contact involved opportunities to the count from opportunities, and then when I go to the update records, instead of like having to choose a contact and then filter by the ID of the contact, I'll kind of show the and then I could filter by the ID of the contact, and then do that. And then I could specify the value, which would be, involved opportunities equals, and I could do the equals count thing here, right? Instead of doing all this jazz, I can just use the IDs and then pick the rec contact where I've stored the information from the earlier part in the flow. This is very nice, especially if you're making several updates to the record throughout the flow. You don't have to remember all the things that you want to change and do it at the end. You just store them all in that record variable, and at the end, you update the record. And so you can see, yeah, this individual is involved in 0 opportunities. The nice thing here, like if I go to, if I come out here and pick a contact, like if I go to Rose Gonzalez, I think I set Rose up so that she would have 4. Like she has 2 related accounts, and each of these accounts has 2 opportunities. And then another nice feature of the Flow debug log is if I debug it again, and I do this, you'll see Rose comes up here. Like the recent records that I've touched automatically pop up in here, so it makes it easy to get the correct record, which is especially useful if you're in an org that has a lot of dupes and you want to make sure that you've got the correct one. The one you went to last is the one you're going to get here. And so if we come here, we look, we can see that it updates, and we say that she's involved in 4 opportunities with no loops within loops using the new in operator. There's actually a couple different operators. There's a couple different things in here that are that I don't have demos for, but are pretty cool. There's a collection sort and a collection filter operator, which in various different use cases can prevent you from additional queries by kind of filtering down an existing collection that you had for some other reason, or sorting a collection. I find a lot of times I don't need these except in very special use cases, but when I need them, they're very valuable, because a lot of times I'm creating my collections with a query where I can sort and filter in the UI in the first place.
That's great. You have some, so the first time I saw one example of this in operator was at the release readiness live, the last one, the winter 23 one, which was recorded at Dreamforce. And I'm going to share the link later on so that you can watch it, because the Sam Reynolds, who's the product manager for ScreenFlows, did also some examples that were meaningful for me, and that ringed some bells.
I think this is a little bit of bonus content. I wanted to go into like using custom metadata in Flow. So we had a customer that basically wanted to, for open opportunities, show the run rate, their expected run rate. So they had like an MRR that they would expect, a monthly recurring revenue value that they would expect, but they also expected that to be lower for the first, second, third, fourth, et cetera month. So we created a custom metadata type that basically um, stores the percentages, so they can easily edit the percentages that they give to each of the months without having to edit the flow. So this is just a little example here, and we can kind of go through. Use I'll refresh. And the so this is nice because you have to worry about the SOQL limits with Flow. So just getting one custom metadata record to get the work done, and then there's only one other. There's I think two creates. Yeah, two creates and two gets. So this Flow in bulk can handle 100 records. So like sometimes, like you could argue that this would be a good opportunity to switch to Apex because you can't do a 200 batch size with it. Like it's gonna fail. It's gonna go over the limits. But if you know that, you can call this from batch Apex, where if you want like the flow writer to have the control, but you want to be able to do that, there's ways to do this. In their use case, this is always on a record save. It's only ever getting one at a time, and we were going fast, so we didn't have we kind of took the okay to go with just not having it perfectly bulkified for 200 batches. But I think the use of custom metadata, I can show the custom metadata type that we set. And actually, I think it's an interesting design decision for custom metadata type. So one way to do this would be to create a custom metadata type with a run rate and with two fields, like a run rate and a number. But we knew that we were going to need to do this in Flow and not code. And so I didn't want to need to loop through a bunch of records, and I didn't want to have multiple queries for all of the months of run rate. So instead, we have give me a second. Instead, we have a bunch of different fields on one record, and they can basically set the values for each of the months going forward, right? So there's not so there's one query. That's it. If you were doing this all in code, you might have architected this a little bit differently. But this is an interesting like consideration for when you're going to use custom metadata in Flow.
Okay, a very nice pattern, Aaron. Do you mind if I ask you a question about the screen flow that you showed at the beginning? Because we have a question on the chat from Guru Prasad, and he's asking if you can explain how you have passed those properties from flow to the Lightning Web Components. I guess that you can show the metadata file a little bit.
Yeah.
Show to Guru how that's defined.
Yeah. So the Lightning Web component. So so we set kind of the variables at the top. Then we just have a getter that grabs the values from the input. This, by the way, is not my expertise. Like I just made it work. So
yeah, I think if you open the metadata file, the meta
oh, you want this one?
XML, yeah, there you should define.
Oh yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you can do fancier things than we've done. Like this file definitely allows you to like show things conditionally. So like if they select one option, another option appears, but that's above my pay grade.
Yeah. Okay, so what we're going to do, Guru, there is a quick take that we have on YouTube explaining how to create this kind of Lightning Web components that are exposed to flows, and I'm going to share that quick take on the resources for this video, which are going to be posted on the video description, okay, so that you have all the information there. And there is one more question. I'm not sure if you can respond this one. If not, we will respond it in the AMA next in 2 weeks. So the question is from Gautam Aditya, and the question is, do we have any framework set for the flows, just like we have trigger frameworks for triggers in Apex?
I won't address the question directly. I think that there's a lot that can be said about what is the appropriate architecture. Like, how many flows should we have per object? How many, like, I have like a general principle that flows that fire together flow together. So if you have like a set of business processes that happens when the stage name changes from X to Z, like all of that stuff should be in one flow. If we want to talk about like more enterprise frameworks, though, there's definitely frameworks out there that allow you to basically have an enterprise trigger management system. And instead of having your flow writers write record triggered flows, they write subflows that your developers call so that the developers can control the order of those things happening. I think in an enterprise setting, that's absolutely the right take, instead of trying to kind of mix record triggered flows with an existing like trigger management system.
What I am going to do, Gautam, is to pass this information also to the flow product managers so that they can like share some best practices and resources in the Ask Me Anything session. Talking about that, I don't know, Aaron, if you wanted to share something else or if I can go to the flow resources already.
I have one more fun
Okay,
thing to
so
show, and then I can,
yeah, let's finish with that, and then we can switch to the flow roadmap and resources that I have here compiled.
Yeah, and this is kind of this flow kind of takes us away from the flow and Apex interaction, but it talks about how we can basically use subflows to kind of write some functional reusable code. So we had a customer that had zip codes stored in 3-digit formats, 4-digit formats, and 9-digit formats, and they wanted a territory management solution where we could match the zip codes, but they didn't ever want us to update the data. Like if it was 234 in the system, they didn't want us to change it to 00234. So I wrote kind of and their territory management like existed across 3 different types of records that needed to be assigned. So I wrote this kind of reusable flow so that it doesn't ever change the database, but in my flow, I can call this subflow and it returns to me the 5-digit zip code value, right? So we can basically give it, 234. We run the thing and we see that our assignment at the end is 00234. If we debug it again and we give it like 4625400, or any number of digits that's more than that, it normalizes it and we get just the first 5 digits. So this is kind of really useful. So we can basically have this reusable flow, grabs us the data we need in the format we need. We can do our comparison and move on without having to like change, fix, or muck about with their bad data.
That's another great pattern. Thank you so much, Aaron. So I think that the audience is learning in this session a lot about all the things that you can do with Flow, right? Because Flow has evolved a lot in the last years, and we are feeling that. But having someone like presenting some real solutions that are in production, like the ones that you are presenting, is really meaningful and helpful for us to understand what's the power of flows, right? Okay, so said that, I'm going to share some more information that I think is going to be helpful for the audience. Let me change this. Okay, so I've been talking about an Ask Me Anything session that we are going to have in this automation month. It's going to be on November 30th. I thought it was November 29th, but it's November 30th at 9 a.m. PT. Okay, and the host is going to be Daniel Larregui, who is another developer advocate like myself. And then we're going to have Antoine Cabot, who is a senior director for product management for Flows, and also Chris Peterson, who is also a senior director for product management, but for Apex. So we're going to have the 2 roles there, and I'm going to make sure that all the questions that you asked today are also responded in that AMA, especially if we missed some of the information that the product managers may want to share. And I wanted to, well, let's go to this first. So Aaron has shown some of the features that we have released in the last in the last releases, such as the in and not in operators. But this is a summary of all the features that we have published recently for flows. And you can see that there are a lot of new announcements and material to get your hands on. For instance, I want to highlight two from this screen. One of them is the ability to use a Lightning flow in a Lightning Web Component that is available from Winter 23. There is a new base component called Lightning Flow that you can use in your Lightning Web Components. So now you can use Lightning Web Components in Flow and Flow in Lightning Web Components. So be very careful with what you do there, right? Because you can enter into a huge recursivity loop, but I'm sure that you are not going to do that. And then I want to highlight another one, which is flow testing. Flow testing has become GA. It's a declarative way of creating automated tests for your record triggered flows. I don't know, Aaron and Kenny, if you have played with flow testing so far.
I haven't had an opportunity to play with the flow testing. I've like did it in a demo org, but I wouldn't say that I can speak to it. But I've definitely worked with like developers to cover flows with test classes, but not the new stuff, unfortunately.
Okay, no, but I'm super glad that you are covering your flows with test classes, because there is a misconception that I've seen in many places that people say, oh, I prefer to use flows because Salesforce doesn't force me to write tests. And that's, well, developers know that it's a big misconception. Test, make sure that your code has a high quality, and we should be covering our implementation with tests, even if they are low-code implementations, right? You can write integration test to test that a flow, record trigger flow is being working correctly. You can write end-to-end test, for instance, to test that your screen flow is doing what it is expected, and so on. But take a look at this feature here, because if you don't have development knowledge, then this is something that you can use to write tests and to have some coverage built declaratively. Okay, so there is there are some things in the roadmap that I want to share. I'm not going to deep dive any of them, because probably this is something that in the Ask Me Anything, the product managers will want to do better. But some things that are interesting to come are like better support for record types, better support for resources, and the ability to like save a flow even if it's not working, right? That's going to help many developers and admins who like doing things progressively and who doesn't want to have necessarily the flow completely working in first place. Something that also is beta in Winter 23, and that we are going to continue working on to advance it to GA, is the data table component in Flow. Have you seen this component? Have you used this?
Yeah, it's pretty fun and exciting, and I think like it's almost even better than like the multiple select lookups, or has its use cases where you can show multiple fields from an account to help people make the correct selections. And you can have single select, multi-select. It returns a list of IDs. It's very fun to
I
play
think
with.
it's going to be very useful as well to implement screen flows. And something that's on the roadmap that I think is going to be very interesting as well are reactive components. This is the ability to make one flow screen component interact with another flow screen component when they are placed in the same page. So for me, it's like something like the Lightning message service that we use to make Lightning Web Components interact, but for Flow. So I'm really looking forward to this functionality here, and it's on our roadmap. And finally, there are some features on the roadmap to allow you to better extend Flow. There are features like such as the ability to directly make an HTTP callout from Flow. That is going to be super cool. also to transform data directly in Flow. I'm not sure how this is going to work behind the scenes, but maybe it's using data with, I'm not sure. And we are going to have also some improvements regarding MuleSoft. And also we're going to publish a Salesforce workflow library, which may be in line with the questions that we had before about patterns or triggers that you can like grab and use in your flows. So finalize this section, I would like to go back to this screen in which I have like a summary of when do we think that is a good use case to use flows or to use code or to use flows in combination with code, right? And here I have some questions that I think that summarize everything that we talked about today. So when you are thinking about which solution to pick, one thing that you can ask yourself is who is going to maintain the code, right? Do I have developers available? If I don't have developers available, then probably a flow can be a better solution because admins can like go there later and change the functionality as they need to, but also this has its drawbacks, and as we have discussed today, right? And especially in regards to testing and code quality or in the implementation quality. So the second question that you need to ask yourself is what's the complexity of the solution that I want to build, right? We saw that there are a ton of things that we can do in Flow, but also that in Apex we have more complex structures, we have classes for implementing encryption, as Aaron showed before. We have batch Apex and we have other tools that may be more suitable when you are writing a higher complexity solution. And the third question is, does the organization has an established CI/CD pipeline? Okay, because for solutions that are written with code, is normally easier to integrate those solutions into your CI/CD pipeline because everything is like automated, right? And you can like deploy your code and execute your test and everything very in a very simple way. And this is something that developers are used to do. But then if you need to use flows, then you have to bear in mind like all the different approaches that you can use to incorporate those flows into your pipeline and to make sure that you are testing those flows correctly and that you are like having a high quality pipeline with good DevOps practices implemented, right? Finally, I already talked about this, but please don't just write flows because Salesforce doesn't force you to write tests. Okay, tests are extremely important to write high quality solutions. So I recommend you to give to take a look at them and to think how you can incorporate them into your pipeline. And there is something else that I want to share, which are some resources. The resources I promised along the codeLive. So the first resource, I'm going to paste all that in the description of the video so that you can like go straight to the resource. The first one is the Winter 23 release Readiness Live at Dreamforce. And there we had a whole section about flow, and in the Q&A at the end there were a lot of great smart questions about flow, so I recommend you to take a look. Then we have the Flow Developer Centers. I like to show these in all the presentations I do because most people don't know that in the Salesforce Developer page there is a section called Discover, in which you have all the developer centers listed, by cloud or product and by technology or feature. There is one for Salesforce Flow, and if you go to that developer center, there you are going to be able to find the related documentation, the related trailhead modules, the related videos that we have published on the YouTube channel. We will include this video here as well. The related blog post, the related podcast, everything so that you can consume the information and learn about the features in the ways that you like the most. Okay. Then the third link is our automation components repo. This is a repo of recipes, common recipes and patterns that you can implement with Flow. This is one of our sample apps, and I recommend you to take a look at it. It does include more automation recipes, not only for flows, but it has quite a lot of content about Flow. And then something that for me is also very, very helpful, which are the architect site decision guides. Have you seen the decision guides at some point?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I've come across them. Yep.
Yeah, you're nodding. Were they helpful for you?
I think they're great. I think they're great for members of the team, but also for customers. Super valuable.
Yeah.
Everything that's coming under the whole like architects content and knowledge base has been super high fidelity content. It's been awesome.
Yeah, it's awesome. So the architect relations team has been working on these guides to help you decide, to help you take design decisions when you are going to build a functionality, right? So for instance, they have a page about record triggered automation. So here you have like some takeaways that you have to bear in mind when you have to decide if you are going to implement a feature with Flow, with code, or combining Flow with code. And here you have like all the criteria that you have to bear in mind to decide if you prefer to take one decision or the other. And you have this for record trigger flows, which is great, but you have also an architect decision guide to help you decide the best solution for your forms use case. So for instance, here we are comparing the dynamic forms functionality with the ability to write a screen flow, or the ability to write a screen flow combined with a Lightning Web Component, or the option to write a form completely in Lightning Web Components, right? And of course, with code, you get more functionality, you have like more flexibility, and you can build a completely custom form. But the other options are worth to take a look, because you can gain in time, in speed, and build also a performant and nice solution that it's easier to maintain. So everything is a design decision. You have to bear in mind like all the possible scenarios in which your code is going to live. And I strongly recommend you to take a look at these guides, not only the ones related to flow and automation, but all the guides that exist in the architect relations site. There is a last resource here, which is the trailhead module. You can take a look at that one as well. And now I'm going to take a look at some more comments that we have in the chat. Okay, so I cannot see some older comments, so sorry for that. We need to the app that we're using that doesn't let me to see like all the comments, but the last comments that we have, there is one from Manoj Kumar who says content document link related objects are not available in start condition in the record trigger flow. That's something that I can pass to the product managers, and that they can talk about in the Ask Me Anything, because if this is in the roadmap, they are going to tell you when it's going to be available. Then there is another comment from Country saying the number of results, that's not much. The number of interviews that were executed in a single bulk execution request when calling an invocable method. That sounds to me like a bug, so I'm going to pass this to the Flow team as well. Okay. And then we have Miriam, who is saying thank you to Aaron, saying that this has been really helpful And I'm really glad that our customers, our viewers today are enjoying this session. And DFRA is highlighting some good points. Frankenstein flows are bad, yeah, and create tests for your flows. Yeah, I'm really glad that you got those outcomes from this presentation. So I think we are going to finalize the session for today. I'm not sure, Aaron and Kenny, if you want to share something else. I want to tell you thank you very much for joining today, because your presence has been very important in this flow. You have been able to share like real solutions for our viewers, and I think that is extremely important. And I'm really impressed with all the things that you built, and I promise that I'm going to spend more time building flows from now on.
Yeah, quick shout out to Aaron for taking the time to put together some of these demos and obfuscate things that we've done internally or customers and make them readily available. So big shout out to the work that he did there, and Alba for prepping all of this. So thank you very much. Thank you, Aaron, for this. And it was a lot of fun.
Thank you. Aaron, do you want to say goodbye to the audience? You are muted.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. And like, I think I've always been a flow first person who has great relationships with developers, and developers have taught me a lot and helped me to make better flows. And I think creating those relationships with the flow writers in your space is awesome. And it's also really easy. It's much easier to learn from developers who have experience in flow. And I've learned a lot from developers who play with flow. So just encourage you to dig in, play around a bit, and help folks like me get better on both sides.
Thank you. So thank you all the audience, and also Kenny and Aaron. And see you in the next codeLive, which starts in an hour. We're going to have another codeLive today, so make sure to be connected. Thank you. Bye-bye.